Hello team, we are the Two Fat Brokers. I am Barney from Dubai.
I'm Ben from Abu Dhabi.
And today we are going to be talking about the great news of the UAE coming off the grey list. What does that mean, Benji?
The grey list. Well, it is a list maintained by the FATF, I think, of countries which are in compliance with their anti-money laundering regulations.
And what does that mean to the UAE? Well, for starters, I mean, why were we put on it? I think everyone was quite surprised when it transpired a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were put on the grey list initially.
I believe because obviously anti-money laundering is, well, so what's anti-money laundering? So money laundering is taking the proceeds of crime and disguising them as legitimate sources of income. So I think, but also what they take into account is also things like sanctions as well. So with the sanctions on Russia that were put in place after the Ukrainian war, I think there was some underlying suspicion, I suppose, that Russia was evading sanctions in various ways, and so some countries were put on the grey list because they were not, they didn't have robust, or they weren't demonstrating enough. They had robust enough rules to manage that anti-money laundering legislation. Yeah, I mean, Russian money was coming in. It needed to be checked.
There was there have been, certainly in the real estate market, there have been procedures put in place since 2019, I think it was. But I think, they weren't necessarily being marshaled as well as they could. And obviously, as soon as we were put on the grey list, then, obviously all hands to the deck to get us off the grey list. And, we, for one, were a real estate company that was audited. Thankfully, we were compliant on most things, but let's just, I don't really want to go into that. We have implemented it since day one. We were doing our global checks on the individuals that we were working with. We were doing our Know Your Clients. We were doing.
Sounds like a defense. Is this court?
I feel like I'm under suspicion. All of a sudden, I raised my hand and
you're getting very guilty.
I'm not guilty.
Guilty vibes here.
What's that? But even we as a company who were taking it really seriously, were found, that we were missing some documentation. Which we put our hands up to and have retrospectively gone through it all. But that was an indication at how seriously the government, the UAE federal government, was taking their predicament.
So you got a proper audit. What does an audit look like?
A 3-day audit. It looks like me not being in the office. No,
on the run. Clearly,
so we it was a Wednesday afternoon, I think, and. We got a knock on the office door, and there were two gentlemen there who came in and just sat down and said, "We want to go through all your books. We want to go through all of your transactions, your transaction history going back, I think it was until 2019." And they were there from midday to midnight, 2 days in a row. Thankfully they
stayed till midnight.
Yeah. Wow. Which very annoying for our secretary, but she towed the line.
You mean you didn't stay till midnight?
I wasn't there.
Give her the night off.
I wasn't there at all. No. I was.
You were in hiding
on the run just in case. I had my own appointments to get to, but it was an in-depth deep dive into the runnings of our company and making sure that we were compliant, which thankfully we were.
I've heard of a few companies getting audited in Dubai.
I haven't heard. All of them have been that I know of.
All?
Well, they should.
All real estate companies.
Yeah.
So we should know, just to mention from the legislation. So real estate companies fall under a specific part of the anti-money laundering legislation. They're like non-DNFB something or other. It's like non-financial companies, but they are often used with various other different types of companies as a way to launder money. Obviously, you take your proceeds of crime, you buy a house with it, and then when you sell that house, you've got origins of the money. So you've basically laundered the money through property. So that's why real estate, that's why real estate comes under a lot of scrutiny in anti-money laundering legislation.
Anecdotally, other industries that the finance industry, obviously banks, the banks,
auditors, lawyers,
were the first people to be audited.
Banks always, but there's other companies where, lawyers, auditors. So our auditor,
gemstone traders are high up there.
Yeah, our auditors want anti-money laundering documentation from us when they audit our accounts. Even though the amount that we pay them is nothing compared to
your profits,
real estate. Yeah, I wish. Nothing compared to real estate transactions, but real estate's traditionally been a very good way to launder money. So's charity, weirdly enough. Ooh, charity is also apparently
that's a bit dark.
Yeah, great way to launder money because everyone also thinks that they're just there for doing good. So you got to do your AML on your clients, your buyers.
AML and KYC. Know your client or know your customer.
What does that mean?
Your perspective on how that client has behaved.
Misbehaved?
Is the money that he or she is spending, is it commensurate with their ability to buy? So, if you've got an individual whose salary is 50,000 dirhams a month, but he's buying a 40 million dirham property, is that ringing alarm bells? Have they, one of the good questions I always find is, have they at the last minute tried to change the name of the buyer? So, okay, well, I'm not going to buy, but my buddy over here is going to buy it. Have they tried to change the jurisdiction from where the money is coming from at the last minute in the transaction? So, you're going through the buying process. The money's going to come from a UAE bank, and then at the last minute, actually, I'm going to transfer the money from overseas to here. Have you got a bank account I can use? That kind of thing. But that's all done from the perspective of the broker, which I think is odd. Because in the UK, which is another market that I know, all of the funds and the proceeds are all received by a solicitor.
True.
So the onus is put on a legal entity to be able to fact check all of this information. However, with the UAE, the federal law here, the onus is put on the brokerage, and more specifically the broker, to be able to fulfill all of this this legal fact checking, which I feel like it might necessarily not be the most efficient way of doing it. Brokers we're brokers, well trained or not well trained. What we do is sell houses. We don't have financial or legal knowledge to be able to correctly do this. So I feel like that's going to change soon. And
also the incentivization is all wrong, right? I mean, if you're going to do this great deal, you're highly incentivized to say like, well, this KYC seems fine. As opposed to if you're completely independent, you should be like, well, hold on, this is suspicious here.
But you wouldn't be able to do it. Well, I suppose unless the federal government are going to implement a governmental process, a government person or persons to oversee each transaction, that would be the only way to do it. Because if you're going to use
you have an independent third party. Like a solicitor or a lawyer, because there's nothing really in it for them. But they are, because there's
by one party.
Yeah, but there's nothing really in it for them, for that to go through. I mean, you could be staring down the barrel of hundreds of thousands of dirhams of commission if this deal goes through, or zero if it goes, bums up. But the solicitor, assuming he gets paid to do this anyway, he still gets his, whatever his fee is. Now, there might be an incentivization there where you're putting pressure on him to clear, because then you'll give him more business in the future. But it's nothing like you get 100,000 dirhams if this goes through and nothing if it doesn't. I mean, that's a massive imbalance of incentivization. And probably companies are going to be pressured by the brokers. The brokers going, no, you've got to clear this guy. There's a huge amount of money for me. And if you don't, maybe I'm going to leave and I'm going to go work for so-and-so because I know they're not as tight on their AML. You don't want an
individual like that working for you at the end of the day, because that is the kind of person, as the owners of companies, you don't want someone who's going to take those kind of risks with, one, your reputation, and two, your license. Because you and I, our heads are on the chopping block if something like that happens.
No, I mean, I see it, but in the end, it's our job to clear that AML, right? And
our job is to register the AML, not clear it. Our job is to make sure that the people that we're dealing with.
No, because you got to clear it, because if it's not cleared, like they come up in cleared. Well, as in say, this does not meet the threshold, because remember, if all the paperwork is in place and we're fine with this even if it's a high risk transaction, we're comfortable with where the money has come from, and we're comfortable, we know the customer and the ultimate beneficial owner, we don't have to register it with the government, with the Go AML system. But if it's a high risk transaction and we don't have that information, then we do register it with the government. And so then,
been doing their training.
That can, That's I used to be a lawyer.
You did not, Ben. This is news to me. Tell me more.
Studied at Cambridge.
No, lies.
Jesus
Prove
College got a 2-1. Anyway, so a lot, exactly as you said, a lot of the onus is put on the brokerage to do this work, and they're going to have very conflicting, motivations and incentivizations here. It would be much better if it was done by an independent body, and so they try and make it independent by saying, okay, you've got to have an AML compliance officer who's separate from your accountant, and then who reports to someone in management and gives them monthly. Yeah, they're still an employee. Yeah. So they're trying to make it independent, but it's very difficult to do. In the end, it'd probably be better to outsource, this kind of thing.
I think that's probably where we're heading. This is a step in the right direction, but I think obviously, the government, the federal government will probably, okay, we need to implement something that's quite far-reaching quite quickly. What's the quickest way we can do it? Use the boots on the ground, and then, behind the scenes, we'll create something that is, that is more sort of akin to I don't want to say advanced, but more sort of established real estate markets.
Yeah, and actually, if they're auditing everyone in Dubai, I presume they can't audit everyone, but a lot of people. I've heard you're not the only one that I've heard has been audited. That's actually a massive departure from the way enforcement is normally done in the UAE. It's not normally done like that aggressively. So they're obviously very serious about it. Like, you don't get audited, for other stuff, your compliance with, the various real estate laws, or very rarely do you get inspected to see, check your employees and get their labor cards out and check your office and this kind of stuff.
But that's what you need to do to get off the grey list, right? You need to show that we're taking affirmative action and we're doing it quickly, and we're doing it, in great detail, and that's how you do it. You don't just, implement things slowly. We've got put on the grey list. We wanted to get off it as quickly as possible. What is the most effective and swift way of doing it?
If they are auditing everyone, there must be a huge effort from the government's perspective. And it would be interesting. Maybe we'll do a podcast on this in terms of regulation for real estate companies, because they could definitely be audited more often. Who are you employing? Do they have real licenses? Do they have visas? All that kind of stuff. Well, the tradition in the UAE has been like a very hands-off kind of, these are the rules. And, unless we get a complaint normally, we're not going to, come and knock on your door and, show us your books. This is a massive departure from that, where people have said, these are the rules, and we're going to proactively check whether you're complying with them or not. So, hopefully, there'll be more regulation in the real estate market off the back of this. And this, won't be the only thing. But I don't know. Let's see.
I think we are in virgin territory. It's a kind of a new dawn. As I said, from the get-go, we were compliant. But even being proactive and compliant when we were audited, there was still documentation that we were missing that we were unaware of. And obviously, now our attention has been drawn to those kind of things. But I know real estate companies that weren't very compliant at all and didn't really take it that seriously. And then all of a sudden, we've come to inspect you.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, in Abu Dhabi, I would say, I don't know most of the real estate companies, but I'd be surprised if many of them are AML compliant, particularly on, what I was asking you.
Can't we?
No, I think it's fair enough. And particularly on what I was asking you. So we had training for it recently, and they were saying, okay, so you've got to do AML on your buyers, which makes complete sense because they're the ones, with the money. And they also said, you've got to do AML on your sellers. And that doesn't make sense because, the seller, anti-money laundering is, where's the proceeds of funds coming from? Like, they're selling their house. It doesn't really make sense to do AML on a seller. And also, when we're talking about leasing, people are spending a few thousand, a few tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dirhams on rent. Do you have to do AML for that? And what about the landlord?
AML or KYC? Because you have to know whether you're representing somebody who is sanctioned on the hit list, as we like to call it. If they're sanctioned, you can't then deal with them. If they're a PEP, you do have to go through a politically exposed person. You do have to go through more stringent checks. So that's probably what they want you to do, not so. And a byproduct of that is to do your KYC, your AML. Sorry, you're doing your
KYC is part of AML. We're using a lot of acronyms here, but basically, the whole thing is anti-money laundering, right? Making sure that you're not, laundering money for other people.
Yeah.
inadvertently. And part of that is you got to know who those people are, so that you need to, get their passport and proof of address and all that kind of stuff. And if it's high risk, proof of funds and other stuff like that. And then you need to then put that all in and then go through their little matrix and see, okay, this is a high risk transaction. If it's high risk, we need more information. If we can't get that information, then we need to register it on the Go AML list and register it with the government. But it can be an absolutely enormous burden. Like if you're doing, these big companies doing 1,000 leases a month, which is not inconceivable. I mean, that's just a huge amount of information that you need from your clients.
And you're leaning on not particularly well-trained individuals to do it. So there will be things that slip through the net.
And if I'm
not deliberately, but it just happens.
Yeah, and if I'm a landlord renting out my studio in Motor City or whatever for 30,000, and you're going to ask me for like my proof of address and passport, I'll be like, why? What are you doing? Like, doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess people will get used to it more and more.
Yeah, we had some pushback at the beginning, but actually, when you begin to explain it to them, and we were sending articles that were in the press, reinforcing what we were asking for, and it was only at that point where individuals were like, okay, well, I'll send it to you. And in the sphere that I work in, where there's a lot of very high net worth individuals, they are super protective about their personal information and their financial information, and they were not happy to share it. They were not, to the point where there was a couple of occasions where we just said, look, I'm sorry, we can't represent you unless you give us that information. And in one case, we didn't represent them. They said, fine, well, I'll find another real estate agent. But it's just not worth our risk to represent somebody who isn't prepared to play ball. And in the past, there's one specific transaction where we walked away. We actually walked away from what was an agreed sale and purchase, because when we did our deep dive into the seller, he was not an individual that we were happy to do business with, and much to the chagrin of the agent.
There was money on the table.
It's not morals. I'm just afraid. I'm too pretty for prison, Ben. This is the problem. I'm just too handsome for prison. No, this individual, and much to the dismay of the broker in our company who was representing him, we just said, look, we're not going to be part of this transaction.
Yeah. But in the training that we went to, they said you can't actually do that because it tips off the person who is potentially doing the money laundering. So they were suggesting that you register them on the Go AML, but you don't say to them that you can't do that transaction. And we were saying, well, okay, do you go through with the sale anyway? And they were saying, well, like, no, but don't mention it that you're not going through it because they haven't passed their anti-money laundering.
We didn't mention the anti-money laundering. We just knew a bit about them. When they give the name, alarm bells ring and you're like, okay, we've heard that name before. Best we stay away from it.
I see.
Well, and he was the seller. He wasn't the buyer. So as you say, his funds were already
laundered.
We don't say laundered, just spent.
Yeah. That's it's interesting. Anyway, it's something new that people in real estate need to get used to now. And it's obviously whatever the government's been doing, whatever we've been doing has been working, because now we're off the grey list.
Well done, the UAE. Congratulations.
Yeah, well done all the brokers out there who sweated blood and tears over their
terrified
anti-money laundering documentation.
And another thing, incidentally, you have to keep checking those individuals over every, I think it's 3 to 6 months. And if they show up,
only if you continue to work with them. You don't have to keep checking them if you don't do another deal with them.
Oh, okay.
Only if they're a regular client. Like, for example, if you're working regularly with a company, only 3 to 5 years or something like that. Yeah, asking for that money laundering documentation again. But in our business, that doesn't really happen. But obviously, if it's a repeat buyer or an investor, yeah.
In my business, we do a lot of repeat business with a lot of clients, so we'll keep checking.
Okay, you do that.
Right, guys, we have been the Two Fat Brokers. I have been Barney from Dubai.
I've been Ben from Abu Dhabi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.